Today, I want to talk about the trap of living a provisional life. What is a provisional life? Well, it's a specific long term pattern where you defer meaningful action until the conditions feel right for you to take that action. And these are actions that you want to take. In fact, a provisional life is a life where you have specific actions you desperately want to take and need to take and would feel deep regret for not taking that you consistently defer and that you consistently put off. This is a provisional life. Why do we call it provisional? Because it's not about just procrastinating. It's about how life gets quietly structured around postponement until what you've been waiting to start becomes what you never built. And in strategy sours into regret. And you'll learn. I want to go through today the structure behind this pattern of behavior, this pattern of thinking, and why your internal logic feels valid even when it guarantees regret. Guarantees regret, and how to identify where that logic is active in your life now. So, we're going to look at what a provisional life is, how to identify the cognitive behaviors in your life, and how to address them and repair them so that you're taking the kind of action today that is not a deferral cloaked or veiled as strategy. So, first of all, what is the internal architecture of this delay? What is this actually? What is happening? What is this? What's going on up here truly? If we were to pull off the veil and you were to be fully honest with yourself and you had the tools of analysis to understand, what would we come up with? What's happening in your mind? So here's the thing. In most self-development literature and self-help advice, it's like the common advice is you're lazy, you need to activate your willpower, and you need to devote and focus that willpower on your life, and you need to, the reason the lever's not moving forward is because you're not pushing hard enough. And you're just going to push harder, and then things will happen the way that you want them to. And I want to say that's a valid instinct, and there's something to that, and there's something relevant about that line of reasoning to this. But that's actually not the root of the issue. It's actually not why this is happening. Okay? The truth is that most people are not passive in their lives. They're exerting massive amounts of willpower in their lives. The problem is not that people don't have the willpower to do what they wish they would do with their lives. They are already, the problem is that their willpower is already tapped out. It is already maxed out. People are busy. And they're overcommitted and they're over-leveraged from an energetic perspective, from a somatic perspective. People are busy. People are planning. People are waiting for a better moment. There's this great concept called time confetti, which is like your schedule's cut up into like all these little pieces of confetti everywhere. It's just like 30 minutes here, 30 minutes here, 30 minutes there, and it's like, right, how, like, what good is willpower in that context, right? They're waiting for a better moment to do something meaningful. Once the money's a little more stable, once the job's a little less chaotic, right? Once the energy that I have is a little bit more consistent. But of course, you and I know that day's never coming. But people hope it is. People need to believe one day things will settle down so they can do the thing they want to do, so they can live the life they want to live. So they make the assumption, often unfortunately, the false assumption that once these conditions stabilize, they'll be able to act clearly and decisively. And you know what? Once these conditions stabilize, maybe they will be able to act clearly and decisively. What's the problem with that line of reasoning? The conditions ain't going to stabilize. So what do we do with that, right? Those conditions don't stabilize. They change shape. The same pattern continues of that deferral. That same cognitive behavior persists. So this is not a failure of effort. It's a failure of structure and strategy. So you've installed a logic, and I've installed a logic that treats action as a conditional on future alignment. So my action will occur upon the condition that the future looks a certain way. right? A version of you that has bandwidth and has clarity and has permission. That's the you that's going to do the thing. And until that you exists, the thing ain't going to happen. Um, and of course, you and I know the big problem with that fallacy is, number one, it lulls us into a kind of peacefulness about, okay, it allows us the future fantasy of a version of ourselves that's going to do the thing we hope, we wish we could do now. It soothes us and helps us feel like, okay, it's going to happen, right? But the problem, that's the benefit. The cost is that we have to lull ourselves into denial of the fact that that future version of ourselves is imaginary. And the longer you postpone, the more distant that imaginary version of yourself becomes, and the less likely you're going to perform that action that you desperately hope one day you will perform. The less likely it is that you're going to live that life, become that person that you desperately wish that you will be. You're not being indecisive, you're not being strategic, you're trying to preserve the option to act later without absorbing the cost of acting now. That's what's happening. It's kind of the obverse or the inverse of delayed gratification, delayed cost. And this principle, in the same way that delayed gratification often brings reward, delayed cost often brings suffering. So take the cost now, pay the cost now. So here are the three mechanisms by which that line of reasoning shows up in our life. What I call the three mechanisms of provisional living. Number one is deferred authorship. Authorship is where you write your life, you write your story. So deferred authorship is where you treat meaningful decisions as something that your future self will eventually feel ready to own. And you keep current actions reversible. So you don't say no decisively. You don't say yes irrevocably. You just this keeps options open. You're keeping everything open, right? What's happening is you're resisting trade-offs. And life gets significantly better the more you double down on making trade-offs. Listen, the game of life is making trade-offs. But when you believe that your most important actions are going to be performed by a future version of you, you're trying to clear the field rather than narrow your lane, right? And it keeps your identity suspended. And you tell yourself, I'm waiting for the right time. But you're actually waiting for relief from responsibility, and that's never going to come, and you actually don't want it to come. And you call your relief alignment. You're waiting for that alignment. That alignment's not coming. So no, the three mechanisms by which provisional living realizes itself in your life is, number one, deferred authorship. Number two is friction aversion. Friction aversion is any action that introduces visible pressure. This is a deadline, exposure, expense, all these things feel premature. So you're trying to make progress without introducing risk. And the result is an endless loop of self-directed preparation. I'm researching, I'm planning, I've got my alignment rituals, I've got my gear, right? These internal debates, right, that you have, right? And so movement is delayed by the pursuit of ideal conditions that never arrive. So you've got deferred authorship, friction aversion, and the third way that provisional living realizes itself in our behavior is narrative drift. Narrative drifts, well, because your commitments are non-specific when you are starting to drift narratively. Your internal story keeps shifting. 1 month, it's I'm going to build this thing. The next month is I'm getting clarity so that I can see what this thing's going to really look like. Right? The absence of this fixed constraint and this commitment means your priorities remain fluid, but also incoherent because you're not committed to a specific task. You're not working on the completion of a specific project. You're not pushing towards the resolution. There's no clear definition of winning for you. What is winning? You have to define that for yourself. If you don't have a definition of winning, you're never going to win. Doesn't matter how much success you have. Doesn't matter how many victories you have. You're never going to feel like you won if you don't know your own personal definition of winning in any given context. Over time, your stated goals stop carrying weight, even to you. You're like, my goal's this, my goal's that. You don't believe yourself anymore. This is the cost of provisional living. So the ways that provisional living realizes itself in our cognitive behavior is deferred authorship, friction aversion, and narrative drift. So why do these things feel smart? They feel smart because, well, they don't just feel smart, actually. This pattern actually feels like maturity. You feel wise. You're like, I'm being very strategic right now. And you tell yourself that you're avoiding impulsiveness. You're waiting until you can do it properly. And but what you're avoiding is actually exposure. What you're avoiding is actually that of like, I'm starting leg day, I'm doing the first rep, here we go. That feeling towards your goals and towards your life and towards these meaningful things in your life, like that is what you're avoiding. Is you're avoiding cost, you're avoiding exposure, you're avoiding expenditure. And you don't want to start until the action guarantees a version of you that's immune to embarrassment or regret. But of course, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy and a vicious circle in that you are guaranteeing yourself embarrassment and more importantly, regret by deferring action, right? That version of you, um, that is guaranteed certain kind of results or that has the right conditions to act the way you want to act, that version of you doesn't exist. The weight doesn't reduce risk. Waiting doesn't reduce risk. It just removes practice. The whole time you could be practicing, and instead you're just persisting at the same level of incompetence, maybe even diminishing. So, how can we reframe this? So, if you've listened to any of my videos before, you know listen, I'm a philosophy nerd. I like to draw from philosophy. Philosophers are, in my view, like the ultimate ultimate tool shed for existential work, for internal personal work. And so I want to start with this concept from Martin Heidegger's book, Being in Time. He writes that to exist is to be thrown into a world with no guarantees. He talks about this concept of thrownness. I'm thrown, I'm cast like a stone, right? We have no guarantees in this life. And what are we thrown into? We're not thrown into a situation of guarantees. We're thrown into a situation of choices. That's life. That's not fair. I don't even know what that word means, fair. I don't even know what it means. Time doesn't wait. It only accumulates. And we are either choice rich or choice poor. You either take advantage of those choices, you seize upon them, or you avoid them. And you don't. And the choices pass you by. And it's either something you grab through action, or you let pass by through passivity. And I'm not saying one is better than the other. You don't want to. Some people get caught in the trap of trying to do everything. You, again, like I said before, the game of life is knowing how to make the right trade-offs. You want to make the right choices. But provisional living, people who are stuck in provisional living are stuck in paralysis, not reaching out, not grabbing those things, not making those choices, not exposing themselves to those risks that could elevate their experience of the world and that could elevate them to the place they know in their mind's eye they see as the place where they want to be, right? That's Martin Heidegger's being in time, this concept of thrownness, right? We don't show up in this world just organically with this set of entitlements, and then we get to complain that things aren't exactly right, and I'm waiting and I'm gaming it. No. You are thrown, and you are doing what you can. You're improvising. You are building an airplane in midair. That is life. Those are the conditions that you will not escape. So accept that and recognize that the game of success in your situation is always a non-ideal game. Once you accept that the best way to win is to figure out how to win within non-ideal circumstances, then your strategies will acclimate to that space, acclimate to that problem space, and you'll stop waiting for an ideal situation and context in which to make those choices, and you'll just start doing the things the best way that you can. So that's Martin Heidegger's Being in Time, this concept of thrownness. Then we move to another existentialist philosopher, Simone de Beauvoir, in one of my favorite philosophical works, The Ethics of Ambiguity. De Beauvoir, she argued that freedom isn't something you get once you're ready. It's something you exercise by choosing under uncertainty. So if you wait until all conditions align, you've already disqualified yourself from freedom. And I'm going to come back to both of these concepts in a second, but I want to introduce, so we've looked at Heidegger, Beauvoir. I want to look also at psychologist Gary Kenyon. Kenyon shows how over time, people who fail to commit to clear action actually lose the capacity for narrative identity. So if you delay long enough, you don't just lose time, you lose the ability to tell a coherent story about what you're doing. So these aren't just intellectual positions, they're descriptions of what happens when people mistake preparation for authorship. So you've got Heidegger's concept of thrownness, Beauvoir's concept of freedom, which is decisiveness in uncertainty. And you've got Kenyon, who couples concept of clear action and clear identity. We forge our identities through action, right? So these three concepts of Heidegger, Beauvoir, Kenyon. So how do we use these ideas to change our pattern? Because each philosophical idea that I've introduced, it's I don't like these aren't meant to be just decorative. I want to name the structures that are like underneath our behavior. And once they are seen, then they can be corrected. And these tools help us to achieve diagnostic clarity there. So here's how each one translates into practical meaning. So for Heidegger, time isn't something you wait for, it's something you're always using. So if you treat your time, this again, go back to thrownness, if you treat time as something that you will, that if you treat time as something that will eventually become yours, as in when things calm down, when this phase is over, when I have the capacity, you're already in the pattern that Heidegger described. You're assuming that time is an external resource you can control and manipulate. And here's the correction. You have to reverse that logic. You have to say, what decision am I already making by not acting today? What decision am I already making by not acting today? Time is not passive. Inaction is a use of time. And the moment you see that, then delay becomes visible as authorship. I'm delaying. No, you're not delaying. You are acting in action. Right? Delay becomes your version of authorship. The more you delay, the more you become a delayer. So this is Heidegger. This is how you are thrown into choice. You're making the choice already to act or not to act. So that's Heidegger. Beauvoir. Waiting for freedom is the act of surrender. So if you tell yourself you'll be more free once you prepare, or once you earn, or you optimize enough, you've already forfeited freedom. So for Beauvoir, freedom is not what you get after you are ready. For Beauvoir, freedom it's what you exercise when you act in contradiction with limited data and imperfect timing and high personal stakes. So what's the correction to this line of reasoning, this cognitive fallacy we make? The correction is, if I delay this again, am I postponing risk, or am I refusing to own that risk? The answer usually reveals what you're protecting, your freedom, whether you're protecting your freedom or whether you're escaping the cost of freedom. And then finally, we have Kenyon's concept of narrative identity, which requires constraint. So Kenyon's idea really is the most psychologically grounding idea. If you never commit, you never accumulate tension. And if you never accumulate tension, your life doesn't form any narrative pressure, it just loops. And you feel restless and you have no arc in your life, no developmental arc. Not because you're behind, but because you are an unstoried person. A person who does not act, a person who delays action is an unstoried person. So, what's the correction to provisional life thinking that Kenyon gives us? It's this. What's the one decision I could make today or this week or this month that would limit my options? What's the one decision I could make this month that would limit my options? That's how you become a storied person, and you commit to that limitation. The goal isn't clarity, it's plot. The plot requires irreversible tension. So, how do you identify these patterns of provisional living thinking in yourself? Right? I don't like giving advice like write a list of this and right? Like just ask yourself, just do this exercise right now. What decision, here's a few questions. What decision has remained undecided in your life the longest, despite being periodically revisited? What decision has remained undecided the longest, despite being periodically revisited? Number two, what version of my life do I privately return to without initiating? What do you fantasize your life could be, and that you return to that fantasy, and it never gets any closer to being real? And number three, what project or role or change have I rehearsed more than once without externalizing? So feel free to rewind, ask yourself those questions, right? If the answer has a clear reference, you're not confused, you're postponing authorship. So what changes the pattern? There's no mindset correction that resolves this. The only intervention is constraint. Something that eliminates the ability to reverse course. This doesn't require ambition. You already have the ambition. It requires specificity. It doesn't mean, if you want to write a book, it doesn't mean start the book. It means commit to a publication date. Right? If you want to quit your job, it's not, okay, I'm gonna leave eventually. No, it's give notice. Right? If you are needing to focus more, it's not focus more, it's block the time, make it cost something. Constraint is not a punishment. Constraint is the only tool that collapses fantasy back into action and converts it to reality. So most people don't regret what they did too early in their lives. They regret what they never started. And the longer you delay meaningful action, the more your life becomes a system that reinforces delay. The structure calcifies. Neurologically, it calcifies. The story collapses. You begin interpreting risk as irresponsibility, and your real aspirations are interpreted as distractions. And the thing is, there's no clarity coming. There's nobody coming to tell you, to remind you, hey, like your dreams are dying inside you. And you're going to die one day, and you're going to have a massive regret. Nobody's going to remind you of that. I mean, I guess this video, if you're watching this video, you already know. Nobody's going to remind you. You have to start doing this. You have to stop living a life in a provisional way. Right? The only clarity you're ever going to get is regret. It's the cost of waiting. Don't pay that cost. Choose something specific. Choose constraint that moves your plot forward. Impose friction. Remember from Heidegger that you're already choosing by delaying. Remember from Beauvoir that real freedom is acting with conflicting data and uncertainty and really a lack of confidence. That's the ultimate expression of freedom. And remember from Kenyon that the way to move your story forward is to introduce constraint into your life, radical constraint. Impose friction, then begin, not because you're ready, but because waiting is no longer a system that you trust.